Welcome to the Friday edition of Juan's World, episode 300. And as I suggested last time, I would do something special for my 300th edition. But as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, why? What is it about a round number, 100, 300, 1,000, whatever, that makes us sit up? Well, that's interesting. Let's get into it. Now, the first thing we need to consider is the nature of round numbers. I mean, what makes 10 or 100 or 1,000 or even 50 or 20 a round number? Well, some of it has to do with the fact that we deal with the decimal system. So that when you get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then you tick over in the decimal system to the next column. You can count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which is actually 10 numbers, but 0 is counting as a number. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stays in one column. When you get to the next number, you have to shift over into the next column. And so you've got one column which has 0 to 9 in it, and then the next column also has 0 to 9 in it, but it's tens rather than units. And then the next one over is hundreds and so forth. I mean, you all know that intuitively, but you may not always necessarily recognize it mathematically. So the round number is the number where you kick over to the next column and you have 0 in the last column. So 10 is a round number and 100 and so forth. Because I don't know why round, I mean round as in like the 0 is round or whatever, I don't know, but it's round. Now, the question often comes up, what is the starting point and the ending point of round numbers? And it kind of depends on how you're counting. If you're counting your birthdays, then you tend to treat each decade starting with 20 really, and then 30, 40 and so on. So like my last big birthday with, big in italics was 70. So humans like to count decades when it comes to their birthdays. And so when I reached 70, was it the beginning of something or the ending of something? Well, it was kind of both. You see, it was the end of my decade leading up to 70, the times when I was 60 something. So that like the end of that now. But it's also the start of my new decade from 70 onwards, because of the way we talk about it. Like when somebody asks me, which they do quite often in Asia, how old are you? Up until I was 70, I could say 60, like 61, 69, 67, but I was in my 60s, right? And so it felt like something different from being in my 70s, right? But when I turned 70, it was a move to a different decade. And so now when they ask me, I have to say, I am 70. It feels or seems older, right? But technically, my first second, third, whatever decade ends with 20, 30, 40, 50. Right? My first decade ended when I turned 10, because my first decade started with 1. Right? Same with years. Right? There is no year 0. The first century begins with the year 1, and it ends with the year 100, because you're counting from 1 to 100, and it's a century. Right? There's 100. So if it started with 0, then you would be fine. And actually, for a long time, bad theologians used to do a lot of their prophetic calculations, assuming that the year in which our current era began was the year 0, and then they realized like the year before we turned over to the CE system, what used to be the AD system, now the CE system. Well, we went from BCE to CE. It's 1 BCE is 1 year, and the next year is 1 CE. Or in the old system, it would be 1 BC to 1 AD, right? That no 0 in the middle. So the end is always going to be 100 or 1,000 or 2,000. So the year 2000, which everyone said is the start of a new millennium or start of a new century, technically is not. It's the end of the old century, the end of the old millennium. And the new century starts with the year 2001. But that doesn't sit well with people. They like round numbers. And so we like this ending point as a beginning point, because that's kind of how we, like when I was talking about ages, well, that's also how we talk about decades. You know, when I talk about the 60s, I don't mean starting with the year 61 and ending with the year 70, or let's say 1961 to 1970. We mean the years that start with the number 6. So it's a bit odd, because that means that if we go back in time long enough, we're stuck with a short decade. But in the terms that we talk about now, like when I say the music of the 60s, I mean anything from 1960 to 1969, anything that has 60 in it. So when I talk about my age, I also talk about my 60s or my 40s or whatever, meaning the numbers that start with 40 or 60 or what have you. That's just more satisfying, I guess, than if we say that the music of the 60s, meaning everything from 61 to 70, because that doesn't sit right. I remember New Year's Eve, 1969 to 1970, where lots and lots and lots of television programs were talking about the end of the 60s, and there was one program I watched in particular called A Child of the 60s, about this guy who was particularly well known back in those days because he had been president of the Oxford Union. His name was Giles Brandreth, and he went on to write some kind of humorous philosophical stuff. And so they had him on, and it's like, you know, I guess he was, what would he be? He must have been about 25 at that time, which means that he was a young teenager at the beginning of the 60s, and they asked him to remember, like, what can you remember of the 60s? So you have to start with 60. Well, why is that rounding so important outside of time? time. Like with time, we can kind of understand it. Like we can designate particular years, our own years, the years of the world, and so forth. But how does it work with other things? Like, well, when it comes to financial transactions, at the shops, savvy business people like to unround numbers. So, for example, let's say this jacket, they want $50 for it. Okay, they won't put 50 on it because there's that 5 at the front, like 50, 50. That's a lot of money. So they'll say $49.99. There's only 1 cent less, but it puts it back in a different decade, right? Decades in terms of money now. And you look at it and you say $49.99. 40, okay, 40's okay. 50's a bit too much, but 40's okay. Well, I think that most of us can figure that out cognitively. But what about emotionally? Like, what about when you're just picking through things and you say, this is 50. I don't want that. This $49.99. Oh, that seems okay. Or how about unrounding numbers when it comes to racing, like the 4-minute mile? Right? People in the 50s, athletes, came very close to 4 minutes, and then finally Roger Bannister broke it. And there's a very famous event. It was at the Iffley Road track in Oxford, and it was Norris McWhirter, who went on to do the Guinness Book of Records and so forth, was the timekeeper. And he made the announcement after the race was over, stringing things out enormously, like Roger Bannister won this race. It was a track record, an Oxford record, a Great Britain record, and so on and so on. He just dragged it all out. And in a time of 3, and he never got to, he did finish, but he couldn't be heard because the crowd just erupted, because he had like unrounded 4 minutes to 3 minutes and 59 seconds. So that was the new world record, and also, an astounding achievement at the time. So it leads me I can't go on too much longer on this track because it goes on forever and ever. But consider why we think in certain terms, given that we count in certain terms. If we counted in different ways, we would round in different ways. And it's quite clear that the Bible rounded in different ways. Like 40 was a very round number for Hebrew scholars. How long did it rain? 40 days and 40 nights. And what that means, if you understand the culture and the language of the time, is that it rained for a long time. Didn't necessarily rain for exactly 40 days and 40 nights, but 40 days and 40 nights is a big round number. And you'll come across 40 as a round number a lot in the Bible, but you'll also come across 12 as a round number a lot. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles of Jesus. How do you buy eggs? In the United States and in the United Kingdom, you buy them in 12. There are dozens. Until the 1970s, 12 was also the number of pennies in a shilling in the imperial system, and so on. That counting by 12s was very common. And when I did my times tables back in the 3rd grade, we did we had already done the 2 and 5 in infant school, so we did 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which is very easy, 11 and 12. Now, why do you need a 12 times table? If you're doing multiplication by hand, you only need up to 10, or really only up to 9. Why the 12? Because 12 was a base number for many things, not just eggs, but lots of things. In Cambodia, where I live now, the base number of counting in mathematics is still 10, but in like daily language, it's base 5. We count moi, bi, bai, boen, pram. That's 5. Pram moi. So we start again. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 1, 5, 2, 5, 3, 5, 4. And presumably because the decimal system arises because we have 10 fingers, but we can count on 5 fingers as well, and as the Cambodians do. The Babylonians had a base 60, which is why we end up with 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, 360 degrees in a circle, 180 degrees in a triangle, and so forth. All of our geometry, for a long time, not anymore either if you're a serious mathematician, but for a long time all of our mathematics, our geometry, the mathematics of geometry, was based on 60. So a round number is what the culture decides a round number is going to be. Why we like round numbers is a curiosity. Why did I say, I've got to the episode 300, I've got to do something special? Well, why? Like 299 is a pretty big number. Or why couldn't I do 301? Don't know. I'm not sure what to do for episode 301. I might change some things around. I don't know. But anyway, there's my Friday musings for you, and I hope you have a good weekend. Please tell your friends to like and subscribe, and I will see you again on Tuesday, perhaps with a recipe, not sure yet. So have a good weekend.